Snow fell on roofs that did not belong to the same ruler they belonged to last winter. A bell rang in a town square, but it rang under new rules. A priest kept his voice low. A soldier watched the street, not with rage, but with habit. The market opened as it always did. Bread baked, water froze in buckets. People moved like people always move. And yet everything felt different, because conquest rarely looks like fire all the time. Most days it looks like paperwork, fear, and waiting. When we say Christmas under conquest, we picture a single night. We picture a raid. We picture a chapel door kicked in. We picture a manger scene smashed on the floor. Sometimes those things happened. But if you want the truth, you have to watch the weeks around Christmas. You have to watch the women, because women did most of the work that made Christmas feel like Christmas. They carried the season in their hands. They baked the bread. They cleaned the icon corner. They patched the children's clothes. They kept a candle lit when it was safe to light it. They kept stories alive when stories became risky. This story is about those women, not queens, not saints in gold frames. Ordinary Christian women living under a new power during the winter season. Some lived in border towns where the flag changed often. Some lived in villages that paid taxes to a distant lord. Some lived in cities where soldiers marched through gates each morning. Some lived in convents. Some lived in homes with one room and a hearth. And some lived through Christmas with a new fear, that the day meant one thing in their hearts, but the world around them now demanded another. To understand what really happened, you have to accept one hard fact. Christmas did not vanish under conquest. It changed shape. It became smaller. It moved indoors. It hid. It blended with normal life so it could survive. You also have to accept that conquest treated people in layers. A conqueror did not always care about a peasant's candle. He cared about control. He cared about revenue. He cared about loyalty. He cared about order. But control reaches the home fastest through women, because women stood at the center of family life. If you want a population to obey, you pressure the people who feed the children, keep the keys, and hold the family's memory. So when Christmas came, pressure came with it. In many places, the first change was not a ban. It was a tax. A new administration arrived and asked the same question every conquering power asks. Who lives here, and what do they own? They counted households. They counted livestock. They counted vineyards, olive groves, mills, and boats. Then they set the rates. The men often dealt with the officials in public, but the women paid the cost in private. When money left the house, women adjusted meals. Women stretched flour. Women watered down soup. Women saved a little oil for a lamp, then decided not to use it because the children needed the oil in food. Women cut back on the small traditions that made Christmas bright. If you lived in a Christian home and you planned a Christmas meal, you planned it with new numbers in your head. How many coins do we have after tax? How much grain do we owe? What happens if the soldiers take a share? You did not ask those questions because you lacked faith. You asked because faith did not stop hunger. Now imagine a winter village. The ground is hard. The fields sleep. The animals stand close to the walls. The air smells of damp wool and smoke. A Christian woman wakes before dawn. She wraps herself in a cloak. She moves quietly, because the house is cold, and she does not want to waste heat. She kneels near a small chest where she keeps what matters. Cloth, a few coins, a worn prayer book, maybe an icon wrapped in fabric. She touches it, She whispers a line of prayer, but she does not do it loudly. Under conquest, sound travels. In this home, Christmas is not a public parade. It is a careful plan. She will bake if she can. She will find honey if she can. She will wash the children's hands and faces. She will mend a tear in a sleeve so they look clean for Mass. But even Mass might be a question. The church may still stand, but the priest may fear provoking attention. The church may have lost land. The church may have to pay fees to function. The church may have limits on bells, on processions, on repairs. So the woman prepares for two versions of Christmas. The version where the family walks to church, and the version where they stay home and pray in whispers. That is the first truth. Under conquest, Christmas becomes conditional. The second truth is that conquest does not treat all Christian women the same. Age, class, and location mattered. So did the kind of conquest. A frontier raid is not the same as a formal takeover. A city under treaty is not the same as a village sacked without terms. But across many conquests, a pattern returns. The conqueror measures the Christian community. He decides what to tolerate, what to restrict, and what to use. Women often become targets of use, not in the crude way people imagine first, but in the everyday way power uses labor, loyalty, and family ties. One of the quickest ways to stabilize control is to stabilize households. That means controlling marriage, inheritance, and identity. For Christian women, Christmas sits inside those three things. Christmas brings families together. Christmas brings baptisms and promises. Christmas brings memory. So rulers watched it for the same reason they watched weddings. Because gatherings reveal loyalty. In some places, authorities allowed Christian worship, but discouraged public displays. In others, they demanded permits. In others, they required Christian leaders to guarantee order. That might sound mild, but think of what it means in a small town. It means the priest becomes a manager. It means the elders become responsible for other people's emotions. And it means women, who often carried the devotional life of the home, now had to judge which acts were safe. A woman might keep her cross tucked under her clothes. She might keep her icon behind a curtain. She might teach a child to make the sign of the cross only inside the house. At Christmas, this hidden faith becomes intense. The season invites singing. It invites candles. It invites food shared with neighbors. But every outward sign increases risk. So Christmas becomes a test of courage and caution.
Some women chose caution because they had children. Some chose courage because they felt they had nothing left to lose. Most chose a balance. They kept the feast inside their own walls. They turned the story of Bethlehem into a story of survival. A child born under danger. A mother moving quietly. A family fleeing at night. Under conquest, the nativity story stops feeling distant. It starts feeling like a mirror. Now step into a city, not a village. A port city with stone streets and noise. Trade continues under conquest because trade feeds empires. Merchants adapt fast. Coins change. Languages mix. Guards take bribes. Laws shift. In such a city, a Christian woman might work. She might spin wool. She might wash clothes for richer homes. She might sell bread. She might serve in a household. She might be a widow who runs a small stall. Christmas in the city can be louder than in the village, but it can also be more controlled. The church may still operate, but it may have lost a piece of its power. Under many conquest systems, Christian communities could keep internal leaders, but those leaders now answered upward. They had to collect taxes. They had to deliver compliance. They had to calm unrest. That placed pressure on women in a quiet way. When men debated politics, women dealt with the consequences. A rumor of rebellion could lead to raids, fines, or arrests. So women became experts in survival language. They learned when to keep silent, when to smile, when to step aside. At Christmas, the city offered temptations and dangers. A busy market could hide a small purchase, like a candle or incense. A crowd could protect a woman on her way to church. But a crowd could also expose her if someone pointed her out. And there was another reality of conquest that shaped women's lives: displacement. Conquest often moved people, not always by force at the tip of a spear, but through pressure that made staying impossible. If your husband died in war, you might leave. If the taxes rose, you might leave. If your village lost its priest, you might leave. If soldiers settled near your farm, you might leave. If a fortress changed hands and your family had served the old lord, you might leave. Women carried children through these moves. They carried what they could. They carried keys that no longer opened anything. They carried cloth that had been part of a dowry. They carried small sacred objects wrapped in rags. Christmas on the road looks different. It is not a feast. It is a night when you tell the children a story to keep them calm. It is a night when you promise that next year will be better, even if you do not believe it. Now add one more layer. In many conquered regions, new rulers encouraged new settlement. They brought their own people. They gave land. They built new buildings. They changed the landscape. That affected Christian women because it changed the social world. Suddenly you had neighbors who did not share your calendar. Your holy days were not their holy days. Your fasting rules were not their fasting rules. Your symbols did not mean the same thing. Some women adapted by building relationships. They traded goods. They learned new words. They learned to read faces. Others pulled inward. They stayed within their community. They married within their group. They guarded identity at the table and at the cradle. Christmas became part of that guarded identity. A Christian woman teaching a child about Christmas was not only teaching a story. She was teaching who they were. That is why conquerors cared. Not always because they hated the story, but because they understood identity makes resistance possible. So what really happened? What happened was that Christmas became a battlefield without swords, fought in kitchens, in doorways, in whispered prayers, in the choice of whether to light a candle. Let's talk about the women in convents, because people often imagine their experience in extremes. Either they imagine perfect safety behind walls, or they imagine instant destruction. Reality was often harder because it fell between those extremes. A convent is not only a spiritual place, it is also a small economy. It owns land, it stores grain, it has a kitchen, it has tools, it may have a clinic, it may teach girls, it may copy manuscripts, it may offer refuge to widows. Under conquest, a convent becomes valuable. A new authority might protect it, tax it, control it, or absorb its property. Sometimes a conqueror issued guarantees to keep local order. Sometimes he seized property to reward soldiers. Sometimes he placed a new administrator to manage it. For the nuns, Christmas was not only a family feast. It was the center of their liturgical year. It was a cycle of prayer, fasting, and ritual. Under conquest, they might still celebrate, but they might lose what made celebration possible. They might lose candles because wax became expensive. They might lose wine because vineyards were seized. They might lose parchment because trade changed. They might lose new novices because families feared sending daughters into a place now under watch. And the convent might face a deeper wound: loss of autonomy.
A nun's life depends on routine. When an outside power forces changes, routine cracks. Imagine a Christmas Eve in such a convent. The chapel is cold. The walls hold the smell of old smoke. The sisters stand in line. Their voices rise and chant, but not as loud as before. They listen for footsteps in the courtyard. If soldiers are stationed nearby, the sisters have to consider the sound of their prayer. If a local official comes to inspect, the sisters have to display compliance. If the convent has lost a patron, the sisters have to ration food. The Christmas story says, "Do not be afraid." Under conquest, fear becomes constant. So the words cut deeper. Now we need to talk about something else that changed Christmas for Christian women under conquest: the moral economy of survival. When a community loses security, people make choices they would not make in peace. A woman might take a job in a household of the new ruling class. She might do it because her children need food. She might do it because her husband is gone. She might do it because her family's land was taken. She might do it because she wants protection. That does not mean she betrayed her faith. It means she needed a roof. But this kind of work changed how she lived Christmas. In a foreign household, she might not be allowed to attend Mass. She might not be allowed to display Christian symbols. She might have to work on the day. She might have to hide her devotion. Some women did quiet things. They touched a cross hidden in a pocket. They whispered a prayer while kneading dough. They saved a small piece of bread and called it their Christmas portion. They taught a child a hymn using a lullaby melody so it sounded like any other song. This is what conquest did. It turned celebration into coded acts. And there is another truth people forget. Under conquest, Christian women often became negotiators. If soldiers came to take supplies, a woman might meet them at the door because her husband was away. She might offer bread to reduce violence. She might speak respectfully to protect her daughters. She might agree to a gift so the house would be left alone. These negotiations were not glamorous. They were exhausting. They were humiliating. They were survival. When Christmas approached, those negotiations became sharper because the season drew attention. A feast implies resources. Resources attract those who take. So women sometimes hid food before Christmas. They buried grain in jars. They stored dried fruit in places only they knew. They told children not to speak about what they had. They avoided inviting outsiders. Christmas becomes secret not only because of religion, but because of hunger. Now let's look at the story from the side of the rulers. Many conquering regimes did not want constant rebellion. They wanted stable tax-paying subjects. That often meant allowing local religious practice under certain limits. So in some cases, Christmas continued in churches, but under restrictions. Bells could be limited. Processions could be banned. Repairs to churches could require permission. Public displays of crosses could be regulated. For women, this meant the public religion shrank and the home religion grew. Women became the keepers of the home altar. A corner with an icon, a cloth, a lamp, a few dried herbs, a small cross. At Christmas, that corner became a Bethlehem. A mother might set out straw under a small image. She might place a piece of bread near it. She might tell the child, "This is for the poor," and later give it away. She might keep the tradition alive through simple acts. And here is something else that happened. Christmas became a time of memory warfare. Conquest brings propaganda. New rulers tell stories about why they rule. Old rulers' stories become dangerous. People argue over what happened, who started it, who betrayed whom. Women often sit near the center of this because women tell stories to children. A Christian woman might tell the nativity story, but she might also tell stories of the old days, when the town belonged to a different lord. She might talk about a grandfather who died defending a wall.
She might talk about a church that once had a golden cross on its roof before it was removed. These stories shape identity. That is why conquering authorities watched education and religious instruction. Even if they tolerated Christmas rituals, they worried about Christmas stories becoming political stories. So women learned to speak in layers. They kept the religious story on the surface and hid the political meaning underneath. They said, "A tyrant tried to kill a child." They did not say the tyrant's name. They said, "The Holy Family fled at night." They did not say, "We may flee too." They said, "The weak survived." They did not say, "We will outlast them." This is a hidden form of resistance. Now, not every story ended in survival. Some women lost everything. Some communities collapsed. Some churches became ruins. Some convents were emptied. Some women disappeared into the fog of history because nobody wrote their names down. That is another truth. History under conquest often keeps men's names because men signed treaties and fought battles. Women's lives appear in fragments: a tax record, a court case, a complaint, a letter, a grave. So how do we tell a story that history tried to keep quiet? We do it by describing the patterns that repeat across place and time. One repeating pattern is the seizure of religious property. When a conquering authority seized church lands, he weakened the local Christian institutions. That affected women because churches and monasteries often supported the vulnerable: widows, orphans, the sick. If that support shrank, women carried the burden at home. A widow might have relied on church charity. Under new rule, that charity might fade. She might have to work more. She might have to send a daughter into service. She might have to marry again, not for love, but for survival. Christmas in such a life does not look like joy. It looks like endurance. Another repeating pattern is forced integration. Conquest often pushed people into new systems, new courts, new taxes, new languages. Christian women had to navigate these systems when dealing with marriage disputes, property disputes, or crimes. Imagine a woman whose husband was killed in fighting. She wants to claim his tools, his land, his house. Under the old system, she knows the priest, the judge, the rules. Under the new system, she faces a court where she may not speak the language well, where the judge belongs to the new order, where witnesses might fear involvement. This is where Christmas becomes painful. Christmas is the season of family, but she stands alone in a court. She may still attend a Christmas service. She may still hear the words of peace, but peace does not restore her rights. So what really happened is this: conquest turned Christian women's Christmas into a season where faith collided with administration. A woman might pray for mercy while dealing with officials. She might hold a child's hand while negotiating a fine. She might sing a hymn quietly while sewing a patch. The holy and the practical became inseparable. Now let's widen the lens. Christmas is not only a day, it is a season. Advent builds tension. Christmas releases it. Epiphany extends it. Under conquest, this season often matched other pressures. Winter campaigns happened. Winter garrisons demanded food. Winter sickness spread. Winter roads became dangerous. So Christian women faced layered threats. A woman might fear soldiers, but she might also fear fever. She might fear taxes, but she might also fear a child's cough. She might fear religious limits, but she might also fear hunger. Christmas does not remove those fears. Sometimes it sharpens them, because you feel what you want but cannot have. That is why many Christmas stories from conquered communities carry a quiet sorrow. Even when they speak of joy, the joy is thin, like a candle flame in wind. Now you might be wondering, did Christian women ever find power under conquest? Sometimes, yes. Not because conquest was kind, but because women are adaptable. A woman who became fluent in the new language could become a broker. She could translate. She could trade. She could secure favors. She could protect her family through connections. Some women used the new order to escape old limits. If the old society had trapped them, the new order might offer a different path, even if it came with new risks.
But even this kind of advantage was fragile. Christmas in such a life might feel divided. She might feel she belongs to two worlds and neither fully accepts her. She might live in a city where the new elite celebrates different holy days. She might work in that world and return at night to her Christian community. She might prepare a Christmas meal in secret. This creates a psychological conquest, the conquest of identity. A woman under conquest often lives with a split self. The public self that survives, and the private self that remembers. Christmas becomes the moment when the private self demands space. Now, let's build a scene that captures the reality without pretending we know one exact woman's diary. It is Christmas Eve. The sky is heavy. A town wall rises above the houses. The gate stands open, because the new guards want trade, not isolation. A Christian woman walks with a bundle of cloth. She looks like any other woman. She keeps her eyes down because that is safer. She passes a group of soldiers near a fire. They laugh. They speak in a language she understands only partly. She does not hate them as individuals. She fears the system they represent. She reaches a small house. Inside, her mother sits near the hearth. A child sleeps in a corner. There is a smell of boiled grain. Not a feast, but food. She unwraps her bundle. Inside is a small candle and a piece of dried fruit she traded for. Not much, but enough to mark the night. Her mother's eyes soften. Her mother touches the fruit as if it is gold. The woman whispers, "We will light it after dark." They wait. They listen for footsteps. They listen for drunken noise. They listen for any reason someone might knock. When the town quiets, they light the candle. The flame is small. It shakes. The mother makes the sign of the cross. The woman does too. She teaches the child in the corner, gently. The child copies the gesture. They speak the nativity story in short lines, like a secret code. They do not sing loud. They mouth the words. This is Christmas under conquest. Not erased, reduced, hidden, but alive. Now, this story also includes moments when Christmas gatherings became points of conflict. In some places, Christmas services drew surveillance. Authorities feared that large gatherings could turn into political meetings. They feared rumors. They feared a call to rebellion. So Christian leaders sometimes had to negotiate permission for Christmas events. That negotiation could include promises, no speeches, no processions, no bells. Women experienced the humiliation of these promises because women often planned the rituals. They prepared the church, the cloths, the food for after service. Imagine preparing a church for Christmas and being told you cannot decorate the outside. You cannot ring the bell. You cannot walk through the street with candles. You must keep it quiet. So the women decorate the inside more. They place cloths. They arrange greenery. They place a small nativity image if they have one. They create beauty where the ruler cannot easily see. This becomes a psychological act. You can control the street, but you cannot control the altar. Yet even this could be risky if an official entered. So women learned to remove signs fast. They learned to hide things in cloth. They learned to make a church look plain in a moment. Again, not because they lacked devotion, but because devotion had to survive. Now we also need to speak about the emotional cost. Conquest does not only take land, it takes predictability. It takes the feeling that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. For women, Christmas is often tied to stability. It is tied to a husband's return. It is tied to children's laughter. It is tied to the smell of the same foods your mother made. Under conquest, those anchors break. A woman might sit at Christmas and look at an empty place where someone should be.
She might have no grave to visit because war took bodies away. She might have a husband alive but absent, forced to work for the new order. She might have a son taken as a recruit. She might have a brother hiding in hills. So Christmas becomes not only a holy day, but a day of grief. And in conquered communities, grief itself can be dangerous. Grief can turn into rage. Rage can lead to action. Action can lead to punishment. So women often had to manage grief, not only their own, but the community's. They comforted others. They told people to be careful. They calmed men who wanted revenge. They asked them to think of the children. This is another hidden labor of women under conquest. Emotional governance. It does not show up in battle maps, but it decides whether families survive. Christmas intensifies this because emotions rise. People remember what was lost. People want hope. Women had to offer hope without triggering danger. They did it with small things. A story, a candle, a shared meal, a piece of bread handed to a neighbor. Now there is a common myth that conquest always forced conversion at the sword point. Reality is more complex. Some regimes tolerated Christians for long periods. Some encouraged conversion with social advantage rather than violence. Some used legal pressure. Some used economic pressure. For women, these pressures could become personal. If a woman converted, she might gain protection. She might gain the right to marry into a stronger network. She might gain relief from certain taxes. She might gain access to certain courts. If she stayed Christian, she might face limits. She might face social walls. She might face economic burden. Christmas becomes the most visible marker of staying Christian because it is a public calendar. Even if she hid it, it lived in her heart and her family. So a woman faced an identity decision, sometimes not as a dramatic choice in a single day, but as a slow erosion. What does it mean to keep your faith when every year the pressure rises? When your daughter asks why you cannot celebrate openly like before? When your son asks why the neighbors mock your holy day? Women often responded with patience. They framed Christmas as a story of oppression and survival. They said, Christ was born under an empire. His family knew fear. We know it too. This interpretation made Christmas even more relevant. It turned the holy day into a lesson in endurance. Now, if you want to tell a taking history story that hits hard, you do not rely on shock. You rely on contrast. Contrast between the Christmas story and the conquered reality. The Christmas story says angels sing. The conquered reality says women whisper. The Christmas story says shepherds rejoice. The conquered reality says widows count coins. The Christmas story says gifts from kings. The conquered reality says a single candle bought at risk. This contrast is what makes the story powerful, because it reveals something deeper. Christmas under conquest was not only about religion, it was about human dignity. A woman lighting a candle in secret is not doing it only for ritual. She is doing it to say, we still exist, we still remember, we still belong to ourselves. That is why conquerors feared small acts. Small acts mean identity survives. Now we reach the hardest part. What happened to women who could not keep their homes? In many conquests, war created a category of women who became refugees. They lived in temporary shelters. They lived in relatives' houses. They lived in church courtyards. They lived in crowded towns. Refugee women had a Christmas that felt like exile. They might attend a Christmas service in a strange church. They might not know the hymns. They might not know the priest. They might not have the familiar objects that made Christmas feel real. But often refugee women clung to Christmas because it gave structure to chaos. It told them that time still moves in sacred cycles. It told them they are part of something larger than this war. So Christmas became a lifeline. A refugee mother might tell her child, "This is Christmas, even if we are not home." She might point to a star and say, "The Holy Family also traveled." This is where the Christmas story becomes a survival manual, not a decoration. Now, take another group. Women who stayed in place, but lost the men. These women often became heads of households. They managed farms. They negotiated with officials. They protected children. They handled funerals and debts. Under Conquest, a woman running a household could be both vulnerable and invisible. She might be ignored by soldiers who focus on men, but she also might be targeted because she lacked protection. At Christmas, such a woman carried the full weight of the season alone. She had to create joy for children while carrying grief in her chest. She might carve a small cross into wood. She might sew a new cloth for the table. She might save a small portion of food for the feast. These actions may look simple. Under Conquest, they are acts of resistance against despair. Now, the story also includes women in the ruling class. Not the conquerors, but local Christian elites who made deals to survive. Some Christian women were married into families that negotiated with the new power. They lived in large homes. They had servants. They wore fine cloth. Even for them, Conquest changed Christmas. Their family might still host a Christmas gathering, but now they had to invite officials or show loyalty. They had to control speech at the table. They had to avoid songs that sounded like defiance. A noblewoman might hold a Christmas banquet while feeling watched. She might smile while fearing a wrong word could ruin her family. So even wealth did not guarantee peace. And there is a darker layer. Conquest can turn women into political tokens. Marriages could become political tools. Alliances could form. A woman could be promised in marriage to secure peace between factions. Christmas in such a life might be a theater. A woman might stand in a church for Christmas service, while knowing her future is already traded. Again, this is not just pain. It is the mechanism of power. So if you ask, what really happened to Christian women during Christmas under Conquest? The answer is not a single event. It is the transformation of their lives into a set of controlled choices. Christmas became smaller, but it also became sharper. It cut through lies. Because when life becomes unstable, you learn what you truly value. Women valued family, faith, and memory. And Christmas stood at the intersection of all three. Now, let's bring this story into a final extended scene that feels like a documentary closing, without turning it into a neat ending. A town square. The air is cold. A thin layer of snow clings to stone. A Christian woman walks with a child. They pass a church. The church still stands, but it has fewer decorations. The door is open, but a guard's shadow falls across the entrance. The woman pauses. She looks at the child. The child looks back. The child does not understand politics. The child understands warmth, light, and story. The woman steps into the church. Inside, the priest speaks quietly. The people stand close because the room is cold. Candles flicker. The smell of wax rises. Faces look tired. The woman holds the child's hand and feels how small it is. She thinks of the nativity story. She thinks of a mother holding a child in a world that did not protect them. She hears the words of the service. She hears peace on earth, and she does not believe the phrase as a description. She believes it as a demand. Then she leaves the church and the street returns. The conqueror street, the normal street, the market street. She walks home. In her house, she lights a small lamp. She places bread on the table. She does not have much, but she has enough for this moment. She tells the child a story. She tells it the way her mother told it. She uses the same phrases. She keeps the same rhythm. And with each phrase, she passes down something the conquest cannot seize. Not land, not taxes, not even law. Memory. That is what really happened. Conquest tried to control Christmas by controlling space, sound, and public symbols. But women moved Christmas into the safest space they had: the family circle, the kitchen, the corner with an icon, the whispered story. And that is why, centuries later, you can still find hints of these lives in songs, in folk customs, in small rituals that outlived the empires that tried to reshape them. Not because the women were powerful in the way rulers are powerful, because they were persistent. They remained.